Hey guys, welcome to lecture 5 of my STEM project. This is Vera here and I hope you guys are having a great day. Now in today's lecture of Python, we're going to be taking a look at three really important Python concepts, and they are lists, for loops, and functions. So without any further ado, let's get right into this lecture by taking a look at lists. So what exactly are lists? Well, lists are a concept, or they're a kind of functionality in Python, and they come under the class of data structures. So a list is a type of data structure that allows you to store, well, data. Now you might be wondering, what are data structures? Because we've talked about data types in this course previously. Data types, if you forgot, include things like integers, floats, and strings. But what are data structures? Because data structures and data types are two different things. Now, an official definition of a data structure would be a data structure is a specialized format for organizing, processing, retrieving, and storing data. So basically, what a data structure does is a data structure allows you to store multiple data types, and it allows you to organize those data types in a certain way. And the reason data structures are important is because many times, whenever you're writing code, you want to store data. And the way you store data and the way you organize that data is going to be really important, because if you choose the right data type, the coding process is going to be way easier, because certain data types are really good at certain things, and they can be used for certain certain scenarios. And something that almost every data type does in computer science is it tries to represent a real world way of structuring data. So any data type, what it does is it tries to mimic a way that in the real world you would actually store data. So a list is a data structure that mimics how you would do lists in real life. So, for example, a grocery list. You guys have probably made or are familiar with grocery lists. So you basically write down neatly, like line after line, you write down all the things that you want to buy at the supermarket. So what lists in computer science do is they try to act as close as possible to lists in real life. So just like in real life, lists store all their data one after the other. So basically, in computer science, we're going to represent lists by two square brackets, and inside the square brackets we're going to have all the data in our list, and inside our list we can have a bunch of data that are stored next to each other. So if this is our list, per se I'm making a grocery list, right? Or let's say I'm making a list related to all the classes that I'm going to have to take in my upcoming school year. Just like in the real world, if I were to write this list down on a paper, how I would like put one element, we're going to call each word or each piece of data that you put in a list an element. Okay, so we're gonna put each element one after the other, and just like that in Python, lists also behave like that. So maybe my first element is math, my second element is English, my third element is history. So just like in real life, where in a list you're gonna write down your first element, put a comma, write down your second element, in Python it's the same thing. In a list we order one object after the other. So whenever we store data, this is how our list is going to look internally. But you might be wondering, okay, so I've stored all my data in the list. How am I going to access this data? Because obviously, and also you're going to store a list in whenever we store this list in in our data, we need to refer to this list by something, right? So we assign this list to a variable. So basically, we're putting this list inside a box or inside a variable, and then whatever name we give to that variable, that's the name that this list has. But obviously, we can't refer to, for example, let's say I wanted to get the value of English. Let's say I wanted to get this value, right? I just can't, how would I access that? Because if I were to type in the variable name of this entire list, I would get every single value in this list, because this list is a collection of all the elements it has. But if I want to access an individual element in the list, how would I do that? Well, in order to do that, what computer scientists have done is, the creators of Python, what they've done is they've allowed you to uniquely identify each element in the list by giving that element a number or an index. So in Python, indexes start from 0. So the first element in your list has the number 0. The second element in your list has the number 1. And the third element in your list has the number 2. So this is kind of like tricky to understand, but once you get it, this is just something you're going to have to remember. But in Python and in lists specifically, the first element in your list is going to have the index of 0. So if I want to get the first element in my list, I'm going to say, hey computer. So from this list, I want to get the element at the 0th index. Or in this case, the 0th index would be the first element, so we would get math. So this is how lists work theoretically. Now, to get a better understanding, let's actually code these lists in Visual Studio Code. So let's open up Visual Studio Code. So this is for another project, but obviously we're going to open up the directory that we've been writing all our code in, my STEM project, right? File, open, recent. Where is it? Okay, so open folder. Hang on just a second, guys. Okay, so as you guys can see in my coding folder, file open, reset, my STEM project, right? And yeah, there it is. So, okay. So as you guys can see, we are in Visual Studio Code, and this is the my STEM project directory, and in here we're gonna be taking a look at lists. So let's take a look at lists, right? I'm just gonna create a new file called list.py, and as we've seen previously in our code over here, to create a list in Python, what you're gonna do is you're gonna be putting these kind of square brackets. So if I wanted to create a list in Python, I can just put these square brackets, and inside these square brackets, I can put any type of data I want. So if the first piece of data I want in my list is a number, I can just type in that number. I can type it in an integer. And let's say the second element in my list is going to be a name, which is a string. So to put in the second element in my list, I'm going to say comma. And you don't have to enter this space, but I just like to enter spaces after commas because, it makes your code look tidy. And now you can enter your second element, like, I don't know, my name. And then my third element, I can add another comma after the second element, and now I can insert my third element, which, I don't know, it can just be true. It can just be the value true. And just to complete the cycle and put all our data types in, we can add a fourth element where we type in pi, 3.141592. I think. I don't quite remember exactly the value of pi, but I'm pretty sure that's pretty close. But as you can see over here, we have a list of primarily random values. There's not really like any pattern in the values that this list holds. But over here, we have a list of primarily random values that holds all our data, right? And now, obviously, I want to store this list in my memory to access the list later. So what I can do is I can store this list in a variable, and I'll just call this variable myList, and myList is equal to this list. So as you can see, variables are not only used to store data structure, data types, or singular values of data, but they're also used to store data structures or multiple data types. Because as you can see over here, in my list, we have multiple pieces of data or multiple data types. Now, let's try printing my list, yeah? Let's see what happens if I print my list. Let's run our Python program down here. Python 3 mylist.py. Oh, my bad. It's supposed to be list.py, right? Because that's the name of our folder, or the name of our file. It's lists. Okay. So now, as you can see, whenever I print my list, or whenever I print the variable that holds the list, it prints out the list as a whole. So you can see it prints out these square brackets, and then it prints out all the elements inside that list. But obviously, let's say I wanted to access the first element in my list. In order to access the first element in my list, what I could do is I could simply put, so next to the variable name that has my list, I put down 2 square brackets. And inside those square brackets, I can put down the index of the element I want to get. Now remember, in Python, indexes start from 0. So the first element is going to be 0. So that's the index of my first element. So if I wanted to get my first element, I would put a 0 over here. So I would put a 0. The second element is 1, then 2, then 3, and so on. But it's important, very, very, very important to remember that the values in a list, or the indexes in a list, start from 0. So if I were to print my list of 0, you'll see it prints out 132, or the first value in my list. If I were to say 1, it's going to print out 0. So I can basically use these square brackets next to my variable name in order to access a certain value from my list. Now, apart from that, lists have a lot of cool functions, or they have a lot of cool additional features that were written by the Python programmers. So to basically see all the cool features that a list might have, you're simply going to type in the name of the list, add a dot, and now as you can see, Visual Studio Code is going to give you a bunch of cool functions. These are called functions that your list can do. And these are kind of the ones with the stars beside them. They're kind of like the main functions that a list has. So I have this append function. I have a sort function, which actually sorts my list. We'll take a look at that later. We have an extend function. We'll be looking at what that does. We have a remove function. So what the remove function does is it's really cool. It removes any element that I give it. So for example, if I want to use the remove function, I say my list dot remove, and now I add 2 circle brackets, and inside those I can type in any element in my list I want, and it's going to remove that element. So let's say I want to remove Vera from my list. What I have to do is I simply have to type in Vera, right? And now you'll see if I print my list after this happens, you'll see Vera won't appear. Voila. As you can see, there is no Vera because Vera was removed from my list. And if I were to print my list before and after this function, you'll see at first there's Vera, and after the functions run, there is no Vera, right? So that's really cool. That is one of the functions. Let's actually, just for fun, let's take a look at the other functions, right? So that's the remove function. Another function would be, remember, my list, and then dot, and it gives you all the functions. We're going to be taking a look at append in a while. We looked at remove. We're going to be taking a look at extend in a while. Okay, let's take a look at insert, right? Or you know what, actually, let's see. Let's take a look at sort, and then we'll take a look at append, insert, and pop, okay? So let's take a look at sort. So what the sort function does is, well, it allows you to sort a list. So let's say I have a list of numbers. Let's call it number list. And in this list, let's say I just have a bunch of random numbers, right? Like, I don't know what I'm typing. I'm just typing a bunch of random numbers. Just a bunch of random numbers, right? 5, 9, 8. So these are a bunch of random numbers, and they are in no particular order. However, if I wanted to sort these numbers, what I can do is I can use the sort function. So over here I can say, let's delete all of this code. Over here I can say number list dot sort, and what this is going to do is this is going to sort our list of numbers. So you'll see over here, if I were to say print number list after sorting it, over here at the beginning you'll see number list is all random, but after I sort it, you can see it's sorted in ascending order. So the smallest numbers are at the beginning while the largest numbers are at the end. So after I do the sort function, if I was to access the value at the 0th index, that would be the smallest value in my list, right? So yeah, and now let's say per se I want to sort it in descending order. I don't want to sort it in ascending order. I want the biggest number to be first. For that, over here inside sort, I can say, I think it's reverse. Yeah, I type in reverse equal to, and then I say true. And what this basically does is it reverses the way it sorts the elements. So instead of 1 being the first element, it's going to be the last element, right? So see? Now it's in descending order, so the biggest number first, and then it goes smaller, 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 smaller until the smallest value. So the sort function is another cool function that you can use. And you might be thinking the sort function only works on integers and floats, but the sort function actually also works on strings. So let's say I have a string list, right? And inside the string list, for now we'll just have some alphabets. So B, A, L, D, Z, E, and X. Now, if I use the sort function, what it's going to do is it's going to sort these string values lexicographically. So basically, it's going to put them in the order that you would see those values in a dictionary if they were all in a dictionary. So in this case, since we only have single letter values, it's going to say A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So over here, instead of number list, let's say string list. and let's print out string list. Right, now if we print it, voila, ZXLEDBA. It's sorting them from I guess greatest value to lowest value, or the word that you'd find last in the dictionary from the word that you'd find first. And if I were to set reverse to false or just delete this entire thing, it'll reverse the order. So it's going to be ABDELXZ. So this is a really cool function. So as you guys can see, we've learned about two functions in Python so far. We've learned about the remove function and we've learned about the sort function. So yeah, that is pretty cool. Now the next thing I want to take a look at is the append function, because let's say I've created my list initially, right? But as my program moves on and as I get user input, I want to add data to my list. So let's go back to our presentation real quick. So again, as I was saying, let's say we created an initial list of math, English, and history, right? But in my program, what my program does is, per se, it allows you to add more classes to your schedule. So after I make this initial list of all the required classes you want to take, my Python program, let's say, allows you to add more classes that you want to take or add more classes to the list. So how would I do this while my Python program is running? Because obviously I can't. I have to add another class to the end of this list, right? So how can I do that? Well, to do that, what we can do is we can use the append function. And what the append function does is, so you say dot append, and inside that append function, you provide some kind of data that you want to add to that to the list. And what that does is it kind of makes your list bigger, and it adds the data you give it. So if I were to say science, it adds the data you give it to the end of the list. And obviously, whenever you add an additional piece of data to the end of the list, it's going to get an index, right? And that index is going to be 3 because this is the 4th element of our list and our element starts from 3. So as you guys can see, whenever I append something, I just add that value to the end of the list, right? So let's take a look at how that works in Python. So we're back in Visual Studio Code. Now let's say, let's actually comment all of this code out and let us create a new list and we'll call it classes, right? We'll try to imitate the example we had in our slides. So we'll create a list called classes, and inside this list we'll have some classes. So like a math class, an English class, and a history class, right? Now let's print this classes list at the beginning. Okay, so as you guys can see, I have the math, English, and history class. So now if I wanted to add another class to the classes list, again, as I said, we would use the append function. So I can say classes dot append, and now inside here, I can give it some kind of data I want to add. So what data do I want to add? And then in this case, I want to add science. So I'd say dot append science. And if I print classes after that append function, you will be able to see I added science to the end of this function. And now I can add as many values as I want to my function, or to my list. And obviously, I can even start my list at 0. So let's say we start our list at 0. So we'll say number, or we'll start an empty list. So we'll say number is equal to that. That's an empty list, right? So now that we have an empty list, what we want to do is, let's say we want to fill this list from numbers 1 to 10. Now all I can do is I can say number.append 1, number.append 2, number.append 3, number.append 4, and so on all the way to 10. And this way I will be given for numbers 1 to 10, right? However, I wanna do something a bit cooler. And instead of actually repeating all of this code, what we can do is we can add numbers 1 to 10 inside our number list using a while loop. So I can say I is equal to 0, and I can say while I less than 10, right? Or we can say I is equal to 1, and we'll say while I is less than or equal to 10. And now inside the while loop, what we can do is we can say number.append I, and then over here we'll say I plus equal to 1. And you'll see what this is doing is it's starting off with I as 0, and every time this loop runs, I is going to be incremented by 1 So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And each and every time the I value changes, we append that value to the number list, right? So that is another way to append values to a number, and this is actually really frequently used if you want to per se, if you want to get some default values for your list. So that is how you can use a while loop with your list. Now there's actually another loop in now actually before we go to for loops, I want to show you guys another little cool trick that you can do with while loops. And for that, let's delete all this code and we'll go back to our classes example. So per se, after so over here, as you guys can see, we have my classes example, and per se, let's say I want to print out my classes value, right? Let's say I wanted to print out all the things in my classes function. So all the let's say my user wanted to look at all the classes he or she is taking, and so they want we need to print out all those values. What we can do is we can use a while loop to basically loop through all the values in our list function, and then we can basically use that to go through all the values and print out all the values. So I can say, obviously, we declare a variable called I. This is going to be our iterator variable. And this time, we're not going to start I at 1. Instead, we're going to start I at 0. Because if you remember, classes, the indexing for classes start at 0. And you'll see why we started at 0 in a moment. And I will say while I less than. And obviously, we want I to go all the way up to however many values that we have in our list. So in this case, we have 3. So I less than 3. And now we print classes of I. So as you see, this is kind of like the smart part, where you'll see at first I is going to be equal to 0. So we're going to print classes of 0, or we're going to print map. And now next, we're going to say I plus equal to 1, or I is equal to I plus 1. And what this is going to do is this is going to add 1 to I. So I is going to be 1. And now classes of 1 is going to be English. And then I is going to be 2. So classes of 2 is going to be history. Now, if we run this program, you'll see how it's printing out all my classes, right? And something cooler I can do is I can kind of say your class number, and then over here we'll say I plus 1 is and then we'll say plus. And what this is basically going to do is this is kind of going to format our values better. So you can see your class number 1 is math, your class number 2 is English, and your class number 3 is history. And the reason I said I plus 1 over here is because naturally humans don't start and count from 0. They don't start to count from 0. They start to count from 1. So that's why we're adding 1. So like basically instead of 0, it's going to be 1. Instead of 1, it's going to be 2. So it's just going to make it look more natural. So that is one cool thing. Now you might notice a problem. Per se, I want to repeat the same function over here, or the same code over here, right? Let's say I want to repeat the same code over here. So while I less than 3, print your class number. So let's say I wanted to do that. You'll see this kind of, so let me run this program. And you'll see what's wrong. So over here, you can see even after I appended the value of science, even after I added the science value to our class, even after I added that to our list, you'll see it's not printing out the science value. You'll see over here, in fact, you'll see nothing is getting printed, right? You'll see it's only printing out this, your class number 1 is math, your class number 2 is English, and your class number 3 is history. It's only printing that out once. It's only printing that out during the first while loop. Now, the reason it's not printing it out during the second while loop is because if you think about it, we haven't redeclared our I variable. So our I variable is going to be 0 at the beginning of the program, but after this while loop, our I variable is going to be 3, right? Now, you'll see, is 3 less than 3? No, so your while loop is not going to run at all. So it is really important that we redeclare our I variable to be 0. Now, if I run this program, you'll see we have another problem. So it says your class number 1 is math, your class number 2 is English, your class number 3 is history. So it only shows up 3 classes, when in reality, if I actually print out the list, you'll see I have 4 classes. So why isn't the 4th class appearing? Well, the reason the 4th class isn't appearing is because over here, we said I is less than 3. So it's only going until, it's only printing out 3 values. It's only printing out the first 3 values. But I want to print out every value in the list. So the problem or the fault is the fact that over here we have a static variable. So saying I less than 3 only works for this list. It doesn't work for any other list. That's not the same variable length as 3. So what I have to do is I kind of have to make my program foolproof by finding a way to constantly update the length of my list. And to find the length of your list, what you're going to do is you can simply say len and then circle brackets, and inside the circle brackets you can say classes. And what this gives you is it gives you the length of the list, or it tells you how many things, how many elements are in your list. And this way, I don't have to rely on a static value. I don't have to rely on a static value. I can basically update the values of my list, or I can update how long my list is every time I use the append function, because that's how it's internally coded in Python. Now if I run my program, you'll see the second time around it does print science. So that is pretty cool, right? And now I'm gonna take a quick kind of break, I guess, from lists, and I'm gonna take a quick detour to look at functions. So let's take a quick look at functions. So basically, what a function is a function allows you to group a bunch of your code and give your code a name, if that makes sense. So you'll see in my program, you can see how these 3 lines of code frequently appear in my program. So they appear twice, right? And I'm reusing these pieces of code. And like, let's say these 2 pieces of code do the same thing in the same way. But per se, I found an error in one instance of this code. Like previously, we looked at how putting a 3 over here would kind of make it to where the values are constant and wouldn't work on every type of list. So over here, I had to change it. I had to change the value from 3 to len of classes. And since I changed it over here, I had to also change it over here, since these 2 pieces of code had to do the same thing. And so if there was an error in one piece of code, there would be an error in the second, right? Because they're the same pieces of code. Now, obviously, just changing two different instances of code is not that hard. But in big programs, there's going to be thousands of lines of code, and like sometimes, like maybe you're reusing this same piece of code hundreds of times. So if I found an error in one instance of this code, I'd have to fix it 100 times. Now that is really tedious, right? Like that's just really hard. So instead, what you can do is you can put these pieces of code in a function. And I'll show you guys what a function does. So first of all, to create a function, what you do is you say def, and then you give that function a name, right? I'll just say print out list. And now you're gonna add 2 circle brackets to your function, and we'll talk about what those circle brackets do. And then you add a colon to your function. And now under this function, after entering a tab, you type some code. So I'm just going to copy and paste this piece of code over here, and we're going to indent the code again, because indentation is very important in Python because it's Python syntax, right? And now what this print out list function does is whenever I type in print out list and then the 2 whenever I type in print out list and the 2 circle brackets, what my program does is it basically replaces this keyword. These are basically like keywords in your program. It replaces this keyword with these lines of code, or whatever lines of code are under this function. And now you can see how this is kind of this is going to be like really efficient, because now instead of writing all this code again, all I can do is, if I wanted to print out my list, I can just say print out list, right? And then if I found an error in this piece of code, I just have to correct it at one place. I don't have to correct it at all the places, because if I correct it at this one place, it's going to be corrected at all the places. So that's what functions do. They kind of allow you to reuse code. And functions, first of all, they help you organize your code, but they're also really useful when it comes to collaboration. Because whenever you create functions, you're basically grouping code by what it does, and that just helps your teammates or your fellow programmers understand what your code is doing. So functions, they're used for debugging, they're used for code readability, they're used for organization, and yeah, those are some of the main reasons that functions are used. So now that we have this Python function, let's try to run it, right? Okay, so that's actually, so the error over here was, I'm using this variable called I, but I haven't declared this variable. So over here it says I'm using this variable called I, and I haven't declared this variable. Now you might be saying, what? Wait, I've already declared this variable I is equal to 0 over here, right? So why is my Python program saying that my function does not have a variable called I? Well, the reason for that is functions, they don't share the same memory as your main program. So essentially, whatever variables and whatever data types that you declare in your main program, which is like all of this code, those do not carry over to your function. So your function doesn't know the existence of a variable I. And let's say I do create a variable I in this function, and I say I is equal to 0. This variable I and this variable I are not related. So what that means is any type of variable that I declare outside a function, I can't access that variable in a function. Now that arises another issue, because if you think about it, our classes variable over here, we're using our classes variable in the function, but our classes variable is not is outside the function. So what can I do? Because I want to use my classes variable, but my classes variable is declared outside the function. So how would I use it inside the function? Well, one method I can do is I can just redeclare my classes variable inside the function. So I can just say class is equal to this inside my function. But a problem with this would be, well, if I make a change to my classes variable in this code over here, that change is not going to reflect to the classes variable in my function. So you can kind of see how there might be differences between your actual code and your function values. So another way that you can use variables that are declared outside of your function in your function is by passing values to your function. And the way to do that is over here inside this inside these circle brackets, what you can do is you can type in a variable name. And this variable name, basically, you're by typing in that variable name, you're declaring that variable, right? But so yeah, let's see how declaring that variable works. So over here, let's say I wanted a variable. I need a variable that talks about my classes list, right? So I declare this variable called classes. Now over here, I'm just declaring my variable. I can assign the value to my variable whenever I call my function. So over here, I can say print out list. And since over here I put classes, inside this print out list function, I can put in a list variable. So I can put in the classes list. And remember, this variable name and this variable name do not have to be the same. This is just another variable name. And the only reason I'm using classes in like both instances is because it just it just fits well. But to avoid any confusion, the classes variable in here, we'll just name it classes1. So you'll see, if I wanted to access whatever data is inside the classes1 variable, I have to use the classes1 variable inside this function. And then over here, whenever I do the print out list function, if whatever list I put into the classes into this function, that's the data that's going to be assigned to the classes1 variable. And of course, I'm going to have to do that again in the print out list function. And now what we're doing is we're passing data from our classes function, or we're passing our data from our main program to our function program in a kind of portal. And now if I run my program, you'll see everything works. You'll see over here it says, and it prints out twice, which is great. And obviously, I can pass in multiple variables. I just don't have to pass in one variable. I can pass in multiple variables. So if I want to pass in 2 variables to my function, I just say comma, and then I type in the value of my variable. Let's say like var2, right? And now here's an important thing. If I have 2 variables declared up here in my printout list function, whenever I call this function, I have to provide those the values for those 2 variables. So like I can just provide comma 2 and comma 2, and now in my var2 variable, there's the value of 2. So that is how you can pass in data to functions. And now one last thing I want to talk about functions is something called returning values, but I think we'll just talk about that aspect of functions in our next class. But for now, this is all you're going to have to know about functions, right? So now that we are done with our quick detour of functions, let's go back to classes. Let's go back to lists, and I just want to talk about one last topic in lists, and that is editing a list. So what do I mean by editing a list? Well, going back to our slides here, we have this list of classes, right? So our first class is math, our second class is English, our third class is history, and our fourth class is science. Now, per se, I want to change the value of this history class, of this third value in my list. So at the second index, instead of history, I want it to be maybe, technology. So instead of history, I want to change this value to technology. So how would I do that? Well, I can do that using something called index modifying. And how you basically do that is over here in my, so what I can do is I can say classes of 2, and I typed in 2 because that's the index of the value I want to change. And now you might recall, whenever I say classes of 2, I'm retrieving the value at the second index of my classes list. However, another cool thing I can do is I can assign values, or I can change values of of whatever value is currently at the second index of the classes list. So I can say classes of 2 is equal to technology, I guess. And what that's going to do is it's going to change the value from history to technology. And voila, as you can see now, instead of history over here, my class number 3 is technology. So basically, I can refer to the specific index and I can assign a value, and that is going to allow us to modify our list. And that is another really important function that you can do with the list. But those are just the main functions that you can do with the list. And obviously, I can use a for loop. I can use a while loop to go through the indexes, and I can access each index, or I can change each index. So that's one reason that while loops are used. Okay, so that is cool. Now, the last thing I want to take a look at is I want to take a look at a different loop called a for loop. So what a for loop allows you to do is it's like a while loop, but for loops are they're more used with lists. So here's let's delete all this code, right? And we'll just use the append function to add a technology class. And now I'm just gonna write some code and then I'll explain it. So for class in classes. Oh, and the reason there's an error is because in Python and in different programming languages, there are certain reserved keywords that you can't use as variable names. And in this case, I'm trying to declare a variable called class, but since that's already used, we'll just call it something else I don't know, this class, right? It doesn't matter, it's a variable name. And then we'll say print. Okay, so we have this class variable, and we're using a for loop, and now let's run this program real quick, and you will see whenever I use a for loop, what I can do is I'm getting all these values using a for loop. So in a while loop, you'll see if I wanted to get all these values, I have to declare a variable, and then I have to increment it and all of that. But in a for loop, I can do that in 2 lines of code. That is really cool, right? So how does a for loop work? Well, how a for loop works in this instance is whenever I say for this class in classes, what the for loop does is first, it assigns the first value in your class's list to the this class variable. So the first time, we're going to take this math value over here, and we're going to store it in the this class variable. And then whenever the loop runs, the first time the value in this class is going to be math. Now after the loop is done running for the first time, the second time the loop goes, it's going to be assigned to the second value in our list, English. So this class is going to have the value of English. And so on and so forth. So it's going to go through each and every value in our list. Now there are some problems with using a for loop for every time you use a list. Because for beginners, you'll see whenever I use a list, I can kind of keep track of what index each object is at. But in a for loop, I can't quite do that because, I don't have an index, I just have the values. And another thing is, in a while loop, I can modify my list. So I can say classes1 of I is equal to so-and-so new value, right? I can type in a new, this is a new class, some new string. I can modify values by using the index. But in a list, in a for loop, you can't do that. So in a for loop, if I were to say this class is equal to, I don't know, some new class, you might think whenever I say this class is equal to some new class, it's going to change the value of each and every one of these list elements to some new class. But that's not true. In a for loop, if I do this, honestly, nothing's going to happen. You're just changing the value inside the variable of this class, but you're not changing the value inside the variable or list of classes. So if you want to edit an array, the best option would be a while loop. However, if you just want to go through the values of an array, if you just want to go through the values of a list, and in Python, arrays and lists can be used interchangeably. So an array is basically a list. Now there are some differences, but I don't want to go into that right now. But when using a list, if you just want to go through the values of a list, a for loop is a good set. Okay, so That's gonna be all for today's lecture. We went through a lot, so I hope you guys can digest all that. And uh, yeah, if you guys have any questions, reach me out because these topics are really important. And also, the assignment for today's lecture is gonna be our first project. So, uh, in our lecture or in our agenda, I posted like a demo of a program that I want you guys to make. So go ahead and use all the knowledge that you've learned so far to make that program. But yeah, that's all for this lecture. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.